Welcome to What the Health? Where anything health is fair game as we tackle the trends and bust the myths about health and wellness. Here are your hosts, Dr. Dan and Angela Turo.
And welcome to our very first What the Health podcast, where anything health is fair game, brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. I am Dr. Dan Turo with
Angela Turo, salutogenic specialist at Turo Family Chiropractic, also Dr. Dan's sister, so should hopefully be a fun discussion for you guys to listen to.
Oh, this is going to be a very fun family dinner table conversation. So
before we get started, just quick disclaimer that we have to do. This is a podcast. We're here for information. We're here to strike up a discussion, get you guys thinking about your health. This is in no way intended to replace your individual medical advice or treatment plans. So always talk to your trusted healthcare provider before making any changes to your treatment plans. And with that being said, today's topic, what are we going with? A big one.
We are going with one of my favorites. We are talking about cholesterol and statin therapy. So, cholesterol. Angela, what the heck is cholesterol and why is it important? Why are we discussing it?
That is the $1 million question. That is the $1 million cholesterol. Cholesterol is the $1 million question. So, cholesterol probably one of the most talked about topics. First of all, two very different things when we're talking about cholesterol. We talk about cholesterol in food and we talk about cholesterol in the body. So this gets very confusing because we hear cholesterol and it gets a very bad name. And is it good or bad? And it comes down to being much more complicated than that. So cholesterol itself, as far as what we find in our body, is a steroid that is important in the development. It's needed in all of our cells. It's needed in the proper functioning of all the hormones in the body. It's needed for the conversion of vitamin D. So it's a very, very important thing that is absolutely needed for our health. So why has it gotten so condemned is really the issue, and what are some of these different terms? So I know we hear about HDL and LDL as far as good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. So Dan, do you want to take a second to explain what HDL and LDL actually are and why they've been deemed good versus bad?
So I remember this discussion back when I was taking biochemistry in chiropractic school. We had a wonderful biochemistry professor, Dr. Silverman, who was really able to simplify things and put it on a level that anyone can understand. But at the end of the day, HDL and LDL, which are talked about so much in cholesterol, are really not cholesterol itself. What are they? HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. So what is it? It is a protein, just like LDL is low density lipoprotein. You see, cholesterol, just like Angela just mentioned, is a steroid-based molecule. So it is fat soluble, not water soluble. So it cannot be carried through your blood. Since your blood is mostly water, it has to be carried on a carrier, just like you would put ships on a barge or containers on a barge. Cholesterol has to be transported in the body through carrier proteins. That's what HDL and LDL are. So where they get their terms good versus bad, HDL carries cholesterol from the body back to the liver to be processed and recycled, and then LDL does the opposite. It takes created cholesterol from the liver and carries it out to the body. That's why people think or quote it as bad, because we're taking it from the liver and taking it out to the body, out to an artery where it could in fact build up a plaque big enough that may stop blood flow. And if the blood flow is stopped to a specific organ like a heart or a brain, you could have something like a heart attack or stroke. So let's dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you mentioned, as far as that's why it's deemed bad or scary, because when we think about cholesterol in the body or cholesterol in the blood, we think of what? Heart disease. That's what we think of. We think of plaque, we think of risk of heart attacks and stroke. But the real idea to keep in mind is, well, why is the cholesterol being carried out? It's not like the body just wants to kill itself. That doesn't make any sense. So why would there be this mechanism in place for cholesterol to be carried throughout the body if it was just this bad, scary thing that just blocked your arteries? So it's important to remember, yes, that can be a side effect of what we're going to get into more, which is lifestyle and a product of our toxic lifestyles. But really, we need to understand, why is it being carried out? Why is that cholesterol going there? And what do those numbers actually mean? And it's really more complicated even than just the HDL and LDL, because as we get into it, there are actually multiple different sizes of those low density lipoproteins, the LDL. And there are certain types that are going to increase your risk for heart disease versus other types that are completely harmless. So when we're looking at overall numbers, it gets very confusing and very complicated very quickly, but unfortunately we treat it as a very simple general thing where we look at these overall numbers and prescribe medication accordingly without understanding the full picture. So what is the actual purpose of LDL? Why is that LDL being carried out? Why is it going to the arteries? So Dan, you want to dive into that a little more?
Yeah, so I think it's just important, again, I my whole, career has been built off of understanding anatomy, physiology, the structure and the function of the body. And what I fell in love with and why, I do what I do each and every day is because when you really start to understand the magnificence of how the body works, it is beautifully, so intelligently, wonderfully made. And when you honor that and you work with and facilitate, how the body is supposed to function, you get amazing. You get to watch the amazing healing benefits. So just one example is cholesterol, and really what cholesterol's role is, when we're talking about wound healing or inflammation or plaque buildup. If you have a tiny cut, and let's just use the example. If you cut your your arm on the outside, you're going to have an inflammatory reaction. There's going to be a biochemical and neurological signal at that local place where the cut is, where the wound is, to start to stimulate an inflammatory response. Now, that inflammation is not a bad thing. That inflammation is very important to be able to heal that wound. All of that happens without any of it, understanding or any knowing of it, or us having to think about it, right? We get cuts all the time. We have scars from those cuts, and they amazingly heal each and every day. Those same types of cuts, maybe not quite to the same extent on the outside versus the inside, but you can have tiny damage to the vessels. And usually we'll have Angela jump in a minute into why that might occur. But if you have a tiny cut, or you have the damage to what's called the tunica intima, the inside layer of a blood vessel, if you think of it as a large, your blood vessels, a dissection of a blood vessel, there's three major layers. There's the externa, there's the media, which is the muscle, and then there's the interna, which lines the inside where the blood is flowing against. If there's damage to the inside of that blood vessel, the body has to heal that, because if it doesn't, then it's going to continue to break down, it's going to continue to weaken, and then you're going to start to bleed internally. That's not a good thing. So we need to have a mechanism on which the body heals, and cholesterol, without going into too much more detail, cholesterol is part of that mechanism to basically put a patchwork around that damaged vessel and allow that vessel to repair itself from the inside, so that blood can continue to flow and not bleed out inside of ourselves. The problem becomes if there's too much plaque buildup, because it's constantly being damaged and it's constantly building up. If there's a blockage large enough to a major area of the heart or a major area of the brain, or any other organ for that matter, but that's where you get heart attacks and strokes. And it has nothing to do with the actual total number of cholesterol, and more to do with why is the vessel inflamed? Why is it damaged in the first place? So with that being said, how would a vessel get damaged, Angela?
Exactly. And you actually brought it up perfectly, where we're talking about, when we talk about atherosclerosis and this building up of plaque in the vessels, that is years, even decades. They are finding now that there are actually children with this damage to the vessels, and that it is actually, so we're not talking about, in your not just what you're doing in your mid-20s or mid-30s, that's predicting your heart attack at 50. We're talking about what you're doing when you're 10, 12, 15, predicting what you're going to have as far as future heart disease risk.
That's interesting. I had no idea that they were starting to see that in the literature that young.
It's incredible to see that when we're talking about damage, I'm not talking about that there's kids walking around with completely blocked arteries that are that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is we see the signs of damage that early on. And that damage is coming from stress. And I'm not talking about just emotional stress. When we talk about stress on the body, it is anything that is really putting the body into this state of fight and repair. And the big thing of it is toxicity. So our diets, and we're going to get into that because a lot of that, unfortunately, is why we've gone down this road as far as overprescribing and the fat is, fear fat phase that we've gone through and we're slowly coming out of. But a lot of it is our diet and what our diet is doing to us. So there's something called oxidative stress, which is where basically the cells get damaged, and that is coming from the very toxic diets that we have as far as sugar, processed foods, trans fats, and artificial fat. So fat is that's a whole nother topic, so stay tuned for that. We'll have a whole one on fat in general, but very quickly, healthy natural fats, your things from your avocados, your nuts, your healthy oils like your olive oils, your coconut oils are very, very good for you. Processed fats, so your canola oils, your vegetable oils, things like that then get heated and turned to trans fats. These are all very damaging to the body, very, very damaging to the body. So if you think about what our ancestors ate versus what we eat today, it is very, very different. And unfortunately, we are doing a lot of damage to those cells. So every time you're exposing your body to those unhealthy diets, every time you're exposing it, we're not working our bodies as much. So our vessels actually can get lazy. Even if you think about exercising, when you exercise, your muscles hurt. You're essentially doing some damage to them, but then they're getting stronger. The same thing happens with the vessels. So if we're sitting all day, every day, those vessels don't have to work that hard because our heart rate's never getting up, it's never pumping. So those vessels actually get weak, which means they can't stand up to that damage, versus if we're living an active lifestyle and our vessels are able to appropriately pump blood throughout the body, are able to handle those changes in heart rate throughout the day. So combination of very unhealthy diets, sitting all day, every day, which has unfortunately just become a product of our modern lifestyle. And then just, not taking care of ourselves as far as, emotionally, that emotional toxic buildup can absolutely affect it as well. So it really does come down to what you're going to hear us talk about a lot, which is the lifestyle choices. But all of those little damages add up over time. So, unhealthy things that you do as a kid, which is unfortunate because we don't have the control over it when we're kids. So parents, we're talking to you, make sure you're getting your kids started on the right track. What you're doing as a young adult, and those are all going to add up. So by the time you're having that heart event in your, hopefully late life, but as early as 40s, 50s, maybe 60s.
30s, 40s.
We're talking about 10, 20, 30 years of damage that's been building up. So this is not, okay, you maybe didn't take care of yourself the last couple years, boom, heart attack. It does not work like that. It is years and years and years of that buildup of toxicity and oxidative stress in the body and damage to those vessels. And cholesterol somehow has taken all of the heat for this very complicated process.
So I think it's important to discuss that and why cholesterol gets such a bad rap, and really what the solution is, or what the solution has been over the last several decades. It's important to understand that. Cholesterol, they were seeing an association of plaque buildup and cholesterol being at the site of that plaque buildup. So, the scientists, made a hypothesis, and they thought, well, if there's cholesterol building up here at the site of the plaque, let's try, and if we can reduce the amount of cholesterol circulating in the blood, well, that should help to reduce the amount of plaque buildup, and then we should hopefully be able to decrease heart attacks and strokes. That was the scientific hypothesis, probably as early in the 1970s and 80s, especially definitely early 80s, but even into the 70s, almost 50 years ago now. Jeez.
Yeah.
Man, I'm feeling old. But that was the understanding, the hypothesis. So if we could find a way chemically to reduce the amount of cholesterol circulating in the blood, then we should be able to see less heart attacks and less strokes. Now, fast forward to today, 5 decades in the future, and actually, really, you can go back to as early 2000s, a 30-year period, and the amount of literature that came out that there was no reduction in all-cause mortality. There was, very, very limited, understanding of the ability to reduce a heart attack or a stroke event, an adverse event, when someone was on statin therapy. Okay, so it's very, that was the solution, was a statin drug, and it basically, a lot of times those statin drugs, they work at the liver level because that's where cholesterol is made in the body, at the liver, and that's why when someone's on statin therapy for a long period of time, well, actually, if you're on statin therapy, you should be having your your liver enzymes checked regularly every 6 months.
Really, if you're on any medication.
Exactly. Really, yeah, if you're on any medication, but especially statins, because it works at that liver level, they want to see the stress on the liver, and if you start to see those liver enzymes elevate, then you're definitely showing some excess stress on that liver, and that needs to be a discussion with your primary care about why that is. Most likely the statins, but in any event, I'm getting ahead of myself here. That was the scientific hypothesis, was that if we could reduce cholesterol circulating in the blood, that was going to lead to less heart attacks, less strokes. Here's the deal, guys. The science is out. It is blatantly obvious across the literature that really taking a statin for any period of time is not reducing the risk of heart attack and stroke. If it is, it's extremely limited, and really what it comes down to is all-cause mortality. That's the number that we have to look at. That means if you look at number of people who are on statins, reducing cholesterol in the blood, versus not on statins, if you look at two different groups over a specific period of time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the all-cause mortality rate does not change. In fact, there is actually some evidence out there that the people on statins have an increased mortality rate compared to those who are not. They might not be dying of heart attack and stroke,
they might be dying
but they
at a higher
might be
rate.
dying of other things. And again, that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I don't think we need to get into today. But again, at the end of the day, if you look at this over time, and we see patients all the time come in and they see us and they're trying to get healthier, and we're trying to look at the whole picture, and they've been on these statin medications for like 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, and you just look at them, you can look at a person and you know whether they're healthy or unhealthy, within a relative basic understanding. You look at these people and it's like, well, you're not a healthy person. Mm-hmm. And now go in and you look at their medication profile and statin, blood pressure, you got the, insulin or, metformin, like they're on these laundry list of medications, 5, 10 medications. You look at them, they're not healthy. Mm-hmm. So what does that tell us about medication? The evidence is there. Being on medication does not make you healthier. It might very, very limited reduce a risk of a heart attack or a stroke, but it's not reducing your all-cause mortality. And
that's interesting. That brings up something we were just talking about, which is this idea of, unfortunately, I think people sometimes get in this mindset of, well, if I take this medication, then I'm good, I'm taking care of the problem, and they don't do the lifestyle changes that need to supplement that. And I'm actually very happy with, I started going on, CDC recommendation, Mayo Clinic, all these different places as far as what they recommend, as far as statin prescriptions and, cholesterol management and things like that. And every single site I went on, whether it was more prominent or kind of down at the bottom, but you cannot go on a single site about statins where they don't mention this needs to be in conjunction with a healthy diet and exercise regimen. And that is really what it comes down to. And I was actually very impressed with the Mayo Clinic. Actually had a very nice article out really emphasizing the nutrition portion and emphasizing the exercise portion actually above and beyond, and really saying in the event that is not enough, then the statin becomes the topic of discussion. And that is really, I think, unfortunately, where we've gone, statins just became as popular as, Advil, Tylenol. It just seemed like everyone, oh, your cholesterol's up a little bit, here's a statin. It just became this norm without really understanding, well, why is it up, first of all? And then, is that a problem? Because that's something I know you really want to talk about, Dan, was this idea of risk. What is the actual risk of having that cholesterol?
Well, and I think that's it very, we can get into a discussion of risk here. Again, this idea of two things we're going to talk about. This idea that we're going to reduce heart attacks and strokes. Again, the all-cause mortality rate. You might have lower cholesterol levels. You will. I mean, if you take a statin, your cholesterol numbers will come down. I mean, there's no argument about that. But does it actually prevent all-cause mortality? Does it actually prolong your life? And
especially if you're not doing the other things. Yes.
Correct. And the evidence is that no, it doesn't. So there's this number. Before we get into risk, there's this number called number needed to treat, NNT. Very popular in the literature, and again, I've learned a lot about this over the last 5 years or so. But again, because I'm not a trained medical doctor or pharmacologist or a pharmacist who really understand these numbers much better. But what you need to understand is that the number needed to treat is the total number of people that you would have to give a medical or a medicine treatment to get one positive outcome. And a really good medicine is probably around 5, meaning that you would need to treat 5 people to see one positive outcome. A 5 to 10, and now 10 is even acceptable. I've seen in some literature. If you treat 10 people, and one of those people, which would really only be 10%, right? One of those people would have a positive outcome. That is still acceptable in terms of a number needed to treat. Most of the literature that I have seen is the number needed to treat in terms of the reduction of a heart attack. You would have to give 60 people a statin medication for 5 years. 60 people for over a period of 5 years to reduce one heart attack event. Now that's for heart attack. For stroke, it's even worse. I've seen numbers in excess over 200. You would have to treat over 200 people for 5 years with statins in order to reduce one stroke. Wow. Now that doesn't even get into the rabbit hole of all the adverse outcomes, right? And that goes back to the all-cause mortality. We're not looking, these people who are on medication, they're actually dying sooner and younger compared to people who aren't on statin therapy. It's just dying from other causes. So sure, they haven't died from a heart attack and a stroke, but they're dying earlier in their life. They're having a worse mortality rate, just because of the toxicity. So cholesterol it's a symptom of the cause, right? It's a symptom of inflammation, of toxicity in the body. It's showing up at the crime scene, but it's not the actual perpetrator. So, and so again, we go back to the risk and what we're actually looking at. So why, people ask me all the time, well, Dr. Dan, how is it that this statin therapy, these statin drugs, they tell everyone to take them. They say like, the 50% reduction, 50% reduction in heart attacks or strokes. That is where the lying or the misinformation with statistics comes into play. Let's just use one example. Let's say one out of your risk of getting struck with lightning is 2 out of a million people over a 5-year timeline. Okay, 2 out of and again, I'm just pulling these numbers. I don't know. I'm just pulling these numbers out. And this is an example that
don't quote Dr. Dan.
Don't quote me. I'm just using this as an example. Please understand. So let's say your risk of getting struck by lightning is 2 out of a million people over a 5-year timeline. If someone creates some, crazy tinfoil copper hat contraption that had some sort of spikes that, the lightning went to the top of the head, and then those spikes were designed to push that lightning down into the ground directly without going through you, and they were able to, reduce that risk from 2 out of 1 million to 1 out of 1 million. That's a 50% reduction.
That is.
Okay, that's a 50% reduction. That's called relative risk reduction, okay? And that's where these, when you look at these drug trials and you look at the effectiveness of statins, they're using this relative risk number to say, oh, we reduced our risk of heart attack and stroke by 40 or 50%. That does not mean that 1 out of 2 people are being prevented from having a heart attack. No, you're looking at, instead of 2 out of 1 million, 1 out of 1 million is being reduced. But you have to get that medication intervention out through millions of people.
And those people have to do it every single day. So you're talking about everyone wearing those tin hats every single day for 5 years for one less person.
For one less person. But if I'm an advertiser, what am I going to advertise? Am I going to advertise?
Less.
Exactly. I'm going to advertise 50% less because, hey, that's what looks good, reduce your risk of lightning strike. That's what, that is where, unfortunately, we have gotten to in science. We have this relative versus absolute risk. And so it's so unfortunate. The same thing is being done today, with COVID interventions, and just the lying with statistics, and whether it's intentionally lying or whether it's just severe, misguided or lack of understanding. Either way, I think is bad. Pick your poison. But the relative versus absolute risk needs to be discussed more, and we have to understand that we are not saving 1 in 2 people when we're looking at cholesterol, statin therapy. We're talking about the amount of people that need to be on a statin intervention for a large amount of time, the number needed to treat, and the relative risk versus absolute risk. It's just astronomically different when you talk about those 2 factors. And that's why, going back to what you said, Angela, all of these statin medications are recommended with diet and exercise. But when you really get to the bottom of it and remove the statin therapy,
with the diet and exercise.
It's the diet and exercise when done appropriately, that's making the biggest difference.
Yeah, and when you're talking about risk too, it's then, you're talking about that risk reduction. So it's also understanding, well, what is the actual risk of, again, having higher cholesterol and not being on that medication. And one book that I know, Dan and I both absolutely love and got really excited about when we initially got into it was the Paleo Cardiologist by Jack Wolfson. So if you have not read it, fantastic read, explains in much more detail everything that we're talking about here and more, and then also why the lifestyle is so important. But he really talks about, he gets into this, is high cholesterol actually associated with heart disease? Because that's the big question. Is because if statins are the answer, well, then we need to get back to the why. Why are we taking statins if cholesterol is not the true culprit? And they were finding, they looked at, he did a lot of data digging and has fantastic resources. Again, absolutely great book. But looked at, in short, all-cause mortality was the same in the cholesterol range of 150 to 250. Wow. So what that means is that chances of dying were the same whether your cholesterol was 150 or 250. Now, if you're not familiar with the guidelines, over 200 is considered high. So he was looking at 50 below normal and 50 above normal. But we're talking about the same risk of dying, and that was with untreated cholesterol levels at that level. So, wow. So this idea of, okay, so that means half of those people, anyone 200 and above, based off current guidelines, would be put on a statin. But why? If their risk was the same as the people in the 150 to 200 range, why? Why are we not looking at the risk? Again, we're not.
Let's play my favorite game. Let's play Dr. Dan's favorite game called Follow the Money.
Yay.
Follow the money. Hey, oh man, we need to have a little like
ding, 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 ding. Yeah, where's our bell?
Oh my goodness. goodness, this is going to be so much fun. I'm so glad we're finally doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to play Dr. Dan's favorite game, Follow the Money. This is a story that when I first learned about it, my blood was just boiling. And this happens all the time. It's happening now in COVID research and outcomes and things, being suppressed and pushed, different narratives and agendas. But at the end of the day, let's go back to the early 90s. Before 1993, do you know what the normal cholesterol recommendation was?
I can't say I do.
240. Okay. Total cholesterol recommendation before 1993 was 240. And again, that would support, whether your total cholesterol was 150 or 250, same all-cause mortality. Okay. However, there was a panel of 10 doctors in 1993, that decided, hey, we're going to try, there's some very limited, there's this 50% reduction, right? They're taking the data and they're looking at the data and they're saying, we have a relative risk reduction of 50%. So let's get everyone on a statin medication, and you know what? Let's lower it, okay? Because we want to get that cholesterol out of people's bloodstream, and if we can do that, we're going to have a 50% decrease, relative reduction, decrease in heart attacks and strokes. So, what was the recommendation? They took cholesterol from 240 down to 200. So what did that do? By taking the normal cholesterol range from 240 down to 200, that made 37 million more Americans, not total, 37 million more Americans eligible to be on a statin medication. Okay? So 37 million more Americans. That's a lot of people on statin medications. Guess what? 9 out of 10 of those doctors, 90% of those doctors that made that recommendation had a direct financial tie to statin therapy intervention, regardless of the companies that were they had a direct financial tie. They were going to get kickbacks. They were going to get money because more Americans and those drug companies that were making this statin medication was going to go through the roof, and they were going to see the benefit. So follow the money at the end of the day. That's I've heard journalists, whenever they're trying to get to the bottom of the story, follow the money trail. When I first heard that story, it just boggled my mind, because again, here you are taking, statistics and lying with statistics to get to an end result of financially benefiting yourself, which completely goes against any sort of fiduciary obligation. If you're a board member, if you're a doctor, you're talking about moral ethics 101, and these doctors just completely bypassing all of it because they have this financial tie, and it's just disgusting. It really is disgusting.
And it comes back to something that I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot in all of these podcasts, which is, again, it's being an advocate for your own health and really understanding and learning to know your numbers, because that is really what it comes down to. So if somebody says to you, your total cholesterol is 210, my first question would be, so what?
So what exactly?
Because first of all, I know I exercise regularly and eat a very healthy diet. So my HDL, which is, again, your good cholesterol, the HDL gets it clearing out, keeps it going back to the liver, gets it reprocessed. My HDL is going to be through the roof, and that's good. You want high HDL. So I'm like,
clean up.
Yeah, it's your cleanup, exactly. So right off the bat, it's like, okay, well, who cares? What if my total is 210? Well, what's that made up of? Is that made up more of the good? Is that made up more of the bad? We also need to talk about triglycerides, which we didn't get into that much. That's a whole nother thing. But there's so many different components to overall that heart risk. And so again, there's one very specific type of lipoprotein that, yes, is absolutely shown to be that increasing that risk of heart disease, but without getting that specific size particle test, which unfortunately is not offered as part of regular care, you're not really getting the full picture. And then say your LDL is higher, quote unquote, higher than normal or higher than recommended. Again, what is your actual risk as a person? Because, research is, we're not hating on research here. I actually worked in research for years.
Which is why she doesn't anymore.
I actually don't anymore. I was going to say, there's a reason I don't anymore because of what Dan was saying with some of the data mining and data restructuring. Yeah.
I've seen a number. I've seen a number as high as 97% of studies of scientists agree with the hypothesis of those who funded them. Does that make sense for what your experience was?
Yeah, it's just it was more just that you can, when you do enough, when your numbers are big enough and you do enough tests, then you can kind of start to manipulate the data and make it say whatever you want. And again, I'm not saying that that's all. There's certainly, good research being done out there. Obviously research has gotten us, a lot of things that have kept a lot of people alive and have been able to improve our quality of life.
Sure.
But unfortunately, we're starting to go into this dangerous part of, okay, well, I saw this research study that said this, and now we're going to shift.
We're going to make an entire policy change based on this one study.
And then again, there's certain things that maybe we don't have the research. Us in the health and wellness field, like maybe we don't have the research to say that, exercising and eating eating well is going to improve your quality of life and years of life and your overall health. But, some of these kind of common sense things are getting lost in getting buried by pharmaceutical research or getting buried by other type of research because, it's just, we can only prove so many different ways that eating a good quality diet and exercising is going to improve your health. And there is research out there that says that. It's just, it doesn't have the big funding that some of these other studies do. So back to what, Dan was saying with follow the money, those doctors, again, they are taught to prescribe statins. We're not, and just so you know, we bash on a lot of things, and I know it's the way we are. We're never condemning individual doctors. We are not condemning people that go into the medical field. We understand this is what you are taught. This is what you know. This is your...
It's a systemic problem.
Yes. And so that's why, and that's really the point of this podcast, this episode and all episodes that we're doing. We want people to start thinking and start understanding and start asking that question. So what? So when your why? When your doctor wants to put you on a medication, why? I just went through this, but for a different topic that we'll talk about another time, but I was just going through this personally where I was, going and every single time it was, here's a medication, and no one could tell me why. And I finally got to the point and said, until someone can tell me why, I'm not doing it. And that's really, we want people to start to have that information, and cholesterol is a big one that we wanted to start with because it is just probably one of the most overprescribed medications.
Toxic medications,
yeah. And so, we just really, really, we want people to understand that, again, we're not bashing you, or if you're a medical professional for doing this, we're not bashing you as a person if you've been taking your statin, but we want you to just start really thinking and understanding what those numbers mean, and not just hearing, oh, my cholesterol's 210, I need to be on a statin.
And again, becoming your single greatest health advocate. And as Angela just mentioned, you become a better health advocate for yourself and your family when, in fact, you are asking questions. One of my favorite lines, and who knows, Tony Robbins may have gotten it from someone else, but the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions. And the health is no different. Health is not a destination, it is a journey, and we are all on this journey together. And when we all ask questions, this is what science is about. Science is about asking questions, because it's never settled. We continue to dive deeper, and when we learn something about the body, we try it for a little bit, and it either works or it doesn't work. And if we follow the true results, then we are ultimately all going to get to that healthy journey and be on that path together, where we can live the best quality of life. We can get healthy and stay healthy throughout our life. The ingredients, it's proven, it's time tested, it's been there, but we have to make sure we're following the correct models, the correct ingredients, right? You can't, you can't start tweaking the recipe until you become a master baker. Let's start with the basic foundational model.
If you have the complete wrong recipe, it doesn't matter how much if they're using salt instead of sugar.
It's not going to taste right.
It's not going to taste right. And sugar's a whole other topic we'll talk about.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, we'll get there.
So, what do you think? That sounds like...
I think that's a pretty good wrap. I'm sure, look, at the end of the day, if any of this resonated with you, if this sounded familiar, I mean, we could talk for hours on every topic.
And we do
sometimes. But there's so much information out there. We want to help to sort through, what is good, what is valuable, and how do we really get to the bottom? How does it impact ourselves and our family's health and well-being? And again, when you become a better advocate for yourself, you're going to make better decisions and how to get healthy and stay healthy. So I'm just so excited we're doing this podcast, having fun with it, and really just helping people, know where to start in terms of being able to ask better questions. So I am Dr. Dan here with Angela. We're so excited that we're getting these podcasts up and going. Our first What the Health podcast, where anything health is fair game, brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. If, in fact, any of this resonated with you and you're interested in learning more, or you're interested in making an appointment in our office, Angela, how can they reach us?
Check us out on our website, turofamilychiropractic.com. We have a lot of great information on there, a lot of different health topics, and you can make your new patient appointment right there from our website. So we look forward to meeting you all and have a great day.
Thanks so much, where we will help you get healthy and stay healthy for a lifetime. See you next time.
You've been listening to What the Health with Dr. Dan and Angela Turo, brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.whatthehealth.world.